Well, I'm OMAR TYREE, born and raised in West Philadelphia like Will Smith, and I moved to an area called Mount Airy, which was a very famous uh, black move-up area. We had moved on up, and we had grass, and we had driveways, and we had lawns, and we had a whole bunch of beautiful girls in Mount Airy. And so we had guys from all over Philadelphia, from West Philly, North Philly, South Philly, all coming to this area called Mount Airy to talk to the girls. And I ended up writing a book about that called Fly Girl. And I became a writer in my early 20s with Fly Girl. I wrote a book about Washington, D.C.'s drug culture called Capital City. I wrote a book about, do right men, breaking down the whole impetus of bad men that, Sister TYREE McMillan put out with Waiting to Exhale and Mama and Disappearing Acts. And she wasn't doing it on purpose, but she just had a tendency of dating bad men and then writing about it. And so I put out a book called A Do Right Man. I published a book called Single Mom, Sweet St. Louis. Then I came back to a sequel to Fly Girl called For the Love of Money. Hit the New York Times bestsellers list. I also won an NAACP Image Award for outstanding work in fiction. So I just been hustling for years. This is 20 years of book writing. Over the last 10 years, we've been trying to push our way into filmmaking, but that's the hardest thing in the world. And I'm natural on camera and natural with storytelling, but it's hard to get financing for any type of story without going through that whole Hollywood vehicle. So I'm OMAR TYREE. You can learn more about me at my website, OMARTYREE.com. I'm also pushing a brand new company, the eBook Nation, Inc., INC, eBook Nation, Inc., INC.com, where you can check out all my new vehicles, which are original ebooks that are set up as film ideas that I'm telling a story idea, because I'm tired of ideas that just sit when you're trying to do films. And so I put them out as ebooks to make sure you can read them and love them and enjoy them and spread the word on them. No, Fly Girl was my second book. The first book I had was a book called Colored on White Campus, typical of urban black people, particularly males. I wanted to be an athlete. And so coming out of Philadelphia, I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I wanted to play football. I ran track. And once I got on University of Pittsburgh's campus, I understood all the politics that were involved in collegiate sports and how they were using and abusing a whole lot of individuals, where they call them scholarship students. They work you to death in that sport, particularly in football and basketball. You got football and basketball all day long, morning, afternoon, and night. And so I'm looking around like, well, when do they get a chance to do regular studies? You know what I mean? So I really got an awakening to that whole sports thing. And so I cut away from sports, and that's when I became a real speaker and writer my freshman year at the University of Pittsburgh. And so I wrote a book called Colored on White Campus, which was pretty similar to Spike Lee's School Days, where you got to be incredibly racial and incredibly conscious about the social divide, the economic divide, the politics of life, the history of black people and brown people and white people and yellow people. And so I became, in a sense, a college historian, really breaking down all the elements of race and class and religion and culture. So I couldn't even concentrate on my studies anymore. And that became my first book, Colored on White Campus, which is now called College Boy. And you can get that from my series called The Urban Griot, Griot. And that's a series I came up with that were more hardcore content, because once I started publishing popular books, women outread men. And so my name became this womanized name. And so I had to create the Urban Griot series so I could do masculine books as well. But Fly Girl was book number 2. Colored on White Campus, which is now called College Boy, was number 1. Fly Girl caught on immediately. I was self-published at the time in my young 20s, young whippersnapper. And at that time, we didn't have a whole lot of African-American books. I used to go to expo events where they would have people who would buy tables. And a lot of people would sell T-shirts, food, cooking apparel, whatever they had. They were all entrepreneurs. So the expo was set up where you would have performers on one part, and then people would come for the performance, and then they would walk past all these different aisles where people had booths and trying to sell stuff. And I was in my early 20s, and on my booth I had my books, Colored on White Campus, then Fly Girl. Then I ended up with a third book called Capital City, where I broke down Washington, D.C.'s murder capital from years 1990 to 92, when it was just crazy down there with drug territory killings. And so with that, I had this table of books, and I was selling my behind off in Philadelphia. I went to the one at the Javits Center up in New York. I went out to Cleveland. I went down to Atlanta. Of course, I was in Washington, D.C. because I transferred to Howard University from Pitt. So I was in D.C. I went to expos in Baltimore, up and down New Jersey to New York, down to Virginia. So I was all over the place selling my books, and it hit immediately. With that Fly Girl book took off, girls were amazed that I had put something in the book that was so contemporary, that was so realistic to black people with the language that we spoke and the culture that we had. And so I was one of the first to do that, and it just blew young women's mind. They couldn't believe that it was actually in a book, and it just took off, and the word spread. And the next thing I knew, I was selling 6,000 copies, 12,000 copies, ended up selling 25,000 copies of my own books in 3 years, and then big fish swallow little fish. I ended up getting a major publishing deals with Simon & Schuster, and from that, it ended up being 14 books in a row with Simon & Schuster, and then my own 3 books, and then I started publishing other books with other individuals, end up with 21 books in a row. Now I'm doing my ebooks, so I'm up to about 25 books in a row, on my way to 50, because I'm going to keep doing these ebooks, but there are a whole lot of brand new ideas that I can push out to the people. Again, you can go to the website, ebooknationinc.com, and read up on all of that, but go to my website to see all the other books that I've already written.